Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum. Welcome to 1 Chronicles chapter 11, in which there are 47 verses. Beginning in verse 2, there's an addition of in time past, right there. Another addition, even when. And then it says here, the Lord, which is essentially Yod-He, Waw-He, so Hashem of Israel, versus Yah, your Elohim. So we can see the relationship between Hashem and Israel is very intimate, to the point he refers to himself as Hashem of Israel. And that's the first instance I've seen of this term being used in conjunction with Israel. Okay, so that's verse 3. Verse 4, his men versus all Israel. Verse 5, a continuous difference of stronghold versus castle. Verse 8, fortified versus built. There's an addition of even from Millo roundabout, and Joab repaired the rest of the city. Verse 9. And verses 4. So the difference here is King David, he increased, waxed greater because Hashem was with him. Whereas the Septuagint adds that as a detail. Besides that he increased, also Hashem was with him. Could be related, but I'm just reading as it reads. Verse 10, chiefs versus chief, and we can see this is actually more accurate in the Septuagint because it names a number of men, not simply one. Verse 11, first of the 30 versus the chief of the captains. Verse 14, he stood versus they. So this could be referring to Eleazar or perhaps David versus they, which could be all the mighty men altogether. Verse 15, giants versus Rephaim. Verse 17, who versus oh that one. So King David was in fact making a specific request of his men. He was not simply making a general statement of exclamation simply on a whim. He wasn't being dramatic. For example, oh, that one would give me a drink of the water of the well of Bethlehem that is at the gate. He wasn't doing this privately. My instinct before knowing about the Septuagint is that King David was simply thinking out loud. He was speaking in a private place, somewhere where his men could not hear him, or perhaps he did not intend on them hearing him. However, we can see very clearly in the Septuagint, he's asking who? Who will give me? So he's speaking to his men. He's addressing his men. Who will give me water to drink of the well of Bethlehem that is in the gate? This is a specific request, and it's not being made in private. He's making this at least publicly in front of his men. So that is a pretty big difference. I would say, I'm going to say that is a big difference. As well, the translators interpret this as a question mark, whereas the Masoretic translators understand this as an exclamation mark, because again, it doesn't seem like a question in the Masoretic, and all my life I've pretty much read it this way until now. We can get a better, fuller picture of what's going on and what David is asking and of who. And so they do get the water out of the well. They didn't just do this overhearing David. They heard him, and he was aware they heard him, and they went and fetch the water. Okay, so verse 19, an addition of in jeopardy. And then it says here mighty versus mightiest. And the footnote for God forbid that I should do this thing reads, it literally means in the Greek, God act mercifully to me because of doing this thing. So it's not that, it can be read two ways. The first way is that God forbid that I should drink the water. Number one. Number two is God forbid that I did this thing, that I asked my men to fetch this water because they could have died. And then the third way you could say is God act mercifully to me. So God be merciful because I was asking this, not realizing the risk. Because how can God forbid what he'd asked, although how can he forbid something that already came to pass in terms of asking this of his men? So it doesn't make so much sense to me, the first two scenarios, whereas the third one, I should say, where it says God act mercifully to me, it sounds like King David realizes his carelessness, you could say, maybe, that he asked this, not really taking into consideration just how risky this was for his men to risk their lives. Verse 20, there's an addition of the 3. So it could be of any 3 versus the 3 that were just mentioned. And then it says here second 3, which clarifies, yes, it is indeed. There's a division between the first 3 and then there's the second 3 of the total of 30. Verse 21. So there are 2 sets of 3s initially. Verse 21, it says, and he was chief, verses 4, he was their captain. So for this reason, he was more honorable or more famous. So it's giving a rationale in the Masoretic. Verse 22, Kabasael versus Kabzeel. So he was doing this for Kabasael versus he came from Kabzeel. So my next question, in still on verse 22, talks about how Benaiah had smote 2 lion-like men of Moab. So what are lion-like men? Are these half human, half creature, half beast? Well, the Bible dictionary provides us with multiple possibilities. It's the lexicon concordance, the Hebrew dictionary. And these are the possibilities. Number 1, again, lion-like, appearing like a lion. Number 2, sons of Ariel of Moab. And number 3, heroic. Verse 23 talks about a Mizraimite, an Egyptian, that he smote, who was 5 cubits high. How tall is that in feet? 7 foot and 6 inches. So that is certainly a giant, even taller than Goliath, who is listed at 6'9", 6'10" in the Septuagint. Verse 25. Beyond the 30 verses among the 30. So he surpassed the 30 versus he was honorable among them. So he was comparable to them. And this individual, Benaiah, seems to be quite remarkable because it does name all these accomplishments, all these acts he did. So it would make sense that he would in some way surpass them in some respects. Okay, verse 25, it says, David set him, who is Benaiah, over his family versus guard. It would make more sense that he would set him over his family. This is a very capable individual. Verse 30, I should say, you know what, I'm going to bring up verse 30. It's an interesting name. We have Kethaod versus Heled. In Hebrew, that means transient. And we have, he's the son of Nuza versus the son of Bana. Let me just look it up in my hard copy. Okay, so it is indeed Kethaod. And that is, no pun intended, a odd name. Because if you are familiar with mythology and modern mythology, there's a character or a creature named Cthulhu, and this kind of reminds me of Cthulhu in terms of the CHTH. So that is noteworthy just for the unique spelling of this individual's name in the Greek. Verse 31, the hill versus Gibeah. Verse 32, Nakhali versus Brooks. Verse 34, Assam versus Hashem. Verse 35, we have the name Thyrophar versus Ur-Hefer. Verse 38, significant difference here. Identifies Joel as the son of Nathan versus being the brother of Nathan, so that is a significant difference there. Verse 39, an addition of Joab. Verse 42, another addition of the Reubenite. And then finally, verse 46, Josiah, his son, versus the sons of Elnam. So, the Masoretic is identifying Jeribai and Joshaviah as the sons of Elnam. The Septuagint, on the other hand, is identifying Josiah being the son of perhaps Jaribi or the son of Elam. Okay, so that's all for this chapter. Thank you very much for your time. Until next time, I bid you all Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Heirini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum, peace be unto you, and Maranatha.